Hey y'all, it's Paige from the editing suite. You might notice that the light in this video goes from super bright to very strange throughout the course of the video. At the end, it almost looks like I'm standing in front of a rear projection screen, like it's a movie in the 50s, except without all the great technicolor and hair and makeup and costumes. And that's because I shot this outside while the sun was setting. So that's what's going on there. Enjoy the video. It's all about beginnings, and I think you're gonna love it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Cakefight Presents The Making of Kaleidoscope. I'm writer, director, producer Paige Feldman, and this week, as every week, I'm taking you inside my process of making my debut feature film. We're going from idea to premiere in real time. So last week, I was supposed to have a video for you that was all about the first 20 minutes of The American President, the classic romantic comedy written by Aaron Sorkin, directed by Rob Reiner, and starring Michael Douglas and Annette Bening. Unfortunately, because I used clips from the film, it got a copyright claim on YouTube, so I'm in dispute now because my use of those clips was fair use. I used it for educational purposes, added my own commentary, and used the minimal amount of clips I needed to get my points across. So hopefully in about 30 days, y'all will be able to see Lost Episode 30, as I'm calling it. But today, because I am deep into revising the beginning of Kaleidoscope, I want to talk about beginnings. Because there are some things that I learned about beginnings as a development executive that are informing my choices as I revise the beginning of my own script. And I want to share those with you. So I'm going to roll those titles and then talk to you about the most important thing about beginnings. And it's not the fact that those first 3 pages are the first 3 things that a gatekeeper is going to read from you. So I have 7 years of experience as a development exec under my belt. And before that, about 3 years of working as an assistant. And the one thing that I hear over and over again from a lot of screenwriting gurus especially, or people who are trying to help you with novel writing, is that the beginning of your story is the most important because a gatekeeper is going to read 5 pages and throw it out if they don't like it. And in my experience, that's not 100% true. Yes, I have, in my days, read only a few pages of a script and then tossed it aside. But 99% of the time that I did that, it was because the script just did not meet the mandate for the company that I was working for. It wasn't the type of thing we were looking to produce at the time, and so there wasn't any point in me reading further. The number of scripts that I've thrown aside because they aren't competently written, I could probably just count on my fingers. Because most people are pretty good about turning in work to people, to strangers, that's at least cogent and coherent. And the same thing goes for screening films. I've stopped watching films after a few minutes, but only because of the mandate that my company had at the time, not because so many of these films were terrible. And I, again, can count, maybe even on just one hand for films, the number of films that I turned off because they weren't good enough. So the most important thing about beginnings is not that they ensure that a gatekeeper, someone who is watching your film or reading your script or reading your novel to offer representation or accept you into a festival, give you money to make your thing, or buy your project to sell it as a book. It's not that they're looking to see whether you are capable of writing the thing. I mean, that's part of it, but that's not the biggest reason. No, the thing that's the most important about beginnings is related to the reason why I love stories. And that's the fact that there are no limits to the kinds of stories you can tell. It's just your imagination. And when you have the whole world open up to you, there's so many amazing directions you can go, but think about the person on the other side of the desk who is receiving those stories. You don't have a marketing team behind you when you're just sending a submission to a gatekeeper. You might have an agent or a manager who will prep a gatekeeper for the thing that they're about to read. But in my case, where I don't have that representation yet, and in a lot of people's cases, even if they do have that representation, the person who's reading or watching your story has a lot of stuff coming across their desk every day, and they might not necessarily remember the whole pitch. They might not read the email that is describing this thing to them, or they might be an intern or an assistant who was told, hey, just read or watch this, and they don't really feel like reading the preparation. They just want to dive in blind. And diving in blind, when there are infinite possibilities about what this story could be about, I mean, that's crazy. Imagine you are just in the middle of a black void, and all you see is one tiny dot of light. That difference, that one tiny dot of light, that's going to be the most important thing in your entire field of vision, because it's different, it's distinct. It's the thing that you're going to want to focus on. And that's what beginnings are to these stories. The first image that you see in a film, the first words that you see on the page of a screenplay, those are that tiny dot of light in the middle of a black room. It's the thing that is going to teach you what the story's about. And every choice that is made teaches the audience more about what the story is going to be about, what the world of the story is, and who the important people are, what the rules of the moral universe are, what the themes are, and what's possible there. Are there flying cars, spaceships, cell phones, gender equality? Probably not. It's limitless possibilities. And so every choice you make as a storyteller is one choice that helps shape the world of the story in the mind of the reader. And the closer those choices are to the beginning, the more weight and impact they have, because they are the first things that the reader learns about the story. All right, so let's go back to that black room. There's that little pinpoint of light. And then all of a sudden you hear a voice, and the voice says, I want you to find a green chair. Okay. Now imagine 45 minutes later. You are out of this black room. You are in the middle of a giant auditorium where there are a ton of chairs all around. And you have people coming up to you saying, hey, have you seen my pen? Hey, have you seen my ball? Hey, have you heard the news about Mr. Travis? Lots of different questions. But you still haven't seen a green chair. All color of chairs are around you except for green chairs. Are you going to want to figure out the pen or the ball or the Mr. Travis mystery before you've solved the green chair mystery? Probably not. Because you were in a black room, and there was just a pinpoint of light and a voice telling you to find a green chair. That seems like your mission, right? I mean, if you don't care about a green chair at this point, please just go along with my metaphor, but you're going to want to find the green chair. When that was the only connection to the outside world you had was a pinpoint of light and a voice telling you to find a green chair, you're going to want to find a green chair. So that's what I mean by the choices at the beginning of the story having the most weight and impact, and also teaching the audience what's important. Every subsequent piece of information you get after the first piece of information is just slightly less important in the mind of an audience who is sitting in a black room with no information other than what you've given them. A metaphorical black room, obviously. I mean, they might be in a screening room, but a metaphorical black room. So if these choices at the beginning of your story have such an incredible weight and impact, it means that everything in your story is Chekhov's gun. And Chekhov's gun is, if you don't know, an adage by Anton Chekhov, a Russian playwright, who said that if you show the audience a gun at the beginning of the first act, it needs to be fired by the end of the third act. So the things at the beginning, the things that you show, need to pay off. So I'm going to tell you what I mean, and I'm going to synopsize slightly changed version of a script that I read when I was an exec that wasn't successful because it didn't follow this adage. So this script was about a small town murder. The sheriff was trying to solve this murder of this guy who everybody in town hated. And in the middle of looking at the crime scene, his brother, who'd been gone forever, comes back. Let's call the brother Jim, and we'll just call the sheriff. So Jim comes back to town. He's been gone pretty long. There was a mysterious absence, and the sheriff is used to Jim being the center of attention. Jim was like the homecoming king, and the sheriff was kind of the nerd that got picked on in high school. And so Jim comes back, everyone's so excited to see him, he's a prodigal son, the sheriff's not excited. We follow Jim. He gets into a relationship with this young woman who works at a convenience store. She's in her mid-20s, Jim's in his mid-30s. It's not really scandalous, but there is a certain air of menace that Jim brings. His affability feels a little sociopathic. It's not quite human. And we delve deeper into the murder victim's life with the sheriff, and there's some startling similarities between him and Jim, their history. They were both, the homecoming king. They were both really well liked. And then in the third act, this drifter comes into town who claims to be Jim and the sheriff's father. It all seems to be leading to a climax of Jim is going to be killing somebody. We think that the woman at the convenience store is in danger. We think the sheriff's in danger. And then it turns out that Jim is fine, the sheriff's fine, the woman at the convenience store is fine, and this drifter that we meet 2/3 of the way through the film, 3/4 of the way through the film, was actually the murderer, and he came back to see what the deal was, and he was a con artist. I was so invested in that script until I realized that the murderer wasn't really part of the story. He kind of came in, claimed to be their father, and then sort of disappeared a little bit, and then it turns out, oh, he was the murderer, this drifter. The script would have been much more compelling if Jim, the person who returned at the beginning, turned out to be the killer, or the sheriff killed this guy in the hopes of luring Jim back home, or even the young woman at the convenience store was messed up in her own right. There were a lot of options that the beginning provided, but none of those options were taken. It was disappointing, and I ultimately passed on the project because of that, because there would have been too many conversations about what we wanted the script to be, what we wanted the film to end up being, and I didn't see a lot of room based on conversations we had with the writers on really making those changes that we'd need to make it what I consider a satisfying film. So that's not to say you can't subvert these audience expectations, that the beginning of the script contains all of the things that are the most important. You just have to be very conscious of the fact that you're going to be doing some things that are going to make people maybe a little bit confused or put them on edge. I'm trying to subvert these expectations in Kaleidoscope. Jonah, my male lead, is a comedian who is not classically handsome. And Lee, my female lead, is uptight and aloof and kind of feels like the Meredith in The Parent Trap, to be honest. Except like cool and not trying to kill small children. But because an audience in a romantic comedy expects leads to look and act a certain way, I've decided that I'm going to give my first big entrance, to Jonah's brother, Zach, who is a movie star, a literal movie star, and to Iris, a secondary character who is like cute and ambitious and everything you might want a romantic comedy female lead to be. And then I very quickly subvert that and start focusing on Lee and Jonah. But I'm doing that very consciously, and I also know that it might not work, and I might have to really center Jonah and center Lee to get people to root for them and be behind their relationship and understand what the film is right at the outset. One film that I saw recently that subverts expectations about the beginning and about what character is the most important and what things we should be focusing on, and does it just masterfully, is Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog. Now, we start off in The Power of the Dog with a voiceover from Peter, who is a 18, 20-year-old young man. And then we very quickly start off into a story about George, who's played by Jesse Plemons, and he is a cowboy and an heir, sort of a tycoon type, who is constantly abused by his big brother Phil. And then we switch over, and suddenly Phil, who's Benedict Cumberbatch, feels like he's the main character, and we make all of these switches pretty effortlessly. And part of the thing that helps is that Jane Campion subdivides this film into chapters. So at the beginning of a different chapter, we start off with a different character. Okay, that feels natural. So no spoilers, but the fact we start with Peter's voiceover is actually completely relevant to the ending and creates a nice harmonious circle. But throughout the entire film, the central character and our focus as an audience is entirely in flux. But it works for her. So that's the important thing about beginnings. It's that every image, word, character you introduce at the beginning has a considerable amount of weight, because there are infinite possibilities for your story. And so whoever you choose to focus on, or whatever you choose to focus on at the beginning, is something that's going to stick in that reader or viewer's mind and inform their opinion about what your story is about and what you're trying to say. So as you are writing or revising your beginnings, I would encourage you to think about your theme of the story, the things that you want to say about the genre that you're writing in, or the world at large, or even just about the people who you're writing about, and try to infuse some of that importance right at the beginning, because I guarantee that it will help people who are watching or reading it understand what you're going for better and connecting with people. I mean, isn't that the point of storytelling anyway? At least it is for me. So if you connected with this video, segue, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more about this kind of content in the future, please hit subscribe. I will be back next week with more about my journey of the making of Kaleidoscope, and I can't wait to share my progress with you then.